Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Thanks so much for joining us for this Ask the Expert session to learn more about how Lockheed Martin is using HoloLens and mixed reality to drive spaceflight. My name is Matt Fleckenstein, and I'm the Senior Director at Microsoft covering our mixed reality group. Before we start, I just want to cover a few of the basics with us. In terms of how to engage, use the chat window to the chat capability to ask your questions. And then those questions will appear to attendees once they've been approved by the moderator. Once they get approved by the moderator, everyone who's in attendance can see them. And we would encourage you to upvote your favorite questions by using a thumbs up button. And so along those lines, again, the key here is to have questions, in the chat window, and then upvote those favorite questions using the thumbs up button. Also, we will answer the questions both verbally. So I'll be selecting some key questions that we're going to pull out and have some discussion around, but we'll also be answering the questions in the chat window themselves. And you'll see as we get toward the end of the presentation that we'll also have a bunch of resources that are available to you if you want to go out and learn more. Of course, this session is going to be recorded, and we would ask that everyone participate, make this a productive session, and use proper etiquette, really helping us all out by not spamming or posting inappropriate comments. This is designed to be a great session. I think it'll be a great conversation with the folks we have invited from Scope AR and from Lockheed Martin. It's just key that we adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct, which in 4 or 5 seconds there, I'm sure you've all read this, and I'm sure you're all nodding your heads in great agreement on this. Before I kind of jump in and start taking questions from folks, we have had a long-standing partnership between Microsoft, Lockheed Martin, and Scope AR to really help design and work on the building out of the Orion spacecraft, which is slated to take astronauts back to the moon in a couple of years. We'll have a great conversation about that. You may have seen Satya Nadella in his keynote talk about that, or perhaps you're able to join one of our digital breakout sessions where we covered that as well. But if you missed those, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a quick minute-long video or so to just give you a little background about the partnership and the types of things that we're doing together.
So imagine, you're crawling inside a spacecraft and you're trying to do the work. The last thing you need is to have to carry paper or tablets or laptops into the environment. Being able to have the data readily available without having to hold on to anything is significant. I'm Shelley Peterson. My role is Principal Investigator for Augmented and Mixed Reality at Lockheed Martin. We work with Orion, which is NASA's spacecraft that will take astronauts out to the moon and even into deeper space, such as Mars. On the Orion spacecraft, there's 57,000 fasteners. And normally the technicians would have to measure to know where to place those fasteners. With mixed reality, they put on the device, they see the digital version of the fastener hovering over the surface, they know exactly where to place it. When we do this, we save about 90% of the touch labor. We take an 8-hour activity of marking locations, and they finish it in 45 minutes. Or an 8-shift activity they can complete in 6 hours. It also reduces the potential for errors because the instruction is just so clear when they see it overlaid on the structure in front of them. Over the last 2+ years that we've used the HoloLens on the shop floor, we haven't had one error, and that's significant. It's just pretty powerful. It takes what we think of as a laptop or computing to the next level. It feels like magic.
So that's just a fun little overview of the work that's happening, like I said, across Scope AR, Lockheed Martin, and Microsoft, right, on the Orion spacecraft. I got a chance to introduce myself right at the beginning. Again, I'm the Senior Director at Microsoft, running our mixed reality marketing efforts at the company. But maybe I'll have Chad, who's joining us from Scope AR. Chad, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, Matt. Thank you so much for inviting us here. Chad Boulanger, I'm the Managing Director for EMEA for Scope AR. I'm based out of Rome, and I've been running edge technologies like AI and AR for the last 8 years.
Awesome. So Scope AR is one of our Microsoft mixed reality partners who has been with us on this journey for a number of years now, I think since 2015. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And then also joining us is Shelly Peterson. Shelly from Lockheed Martin. Shelly, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Shelly Peterson, work with Lockheed Martin as the principal investigator of augmented and mixed reality.
That's great. And then Charlie is the product lead. He's the head of product for our HoloLens product. Charlie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hey, my name is Charlie Ham, and as Matt said, I lead our product group within the HoloLens team. I've been in the group and team working on this for about 7 years now, and so a lot of my time is spent on working with customers and partners and ensuring that we build the right things for our overall market.
Great. And so we've got a great group of experts here. We've got also some other folks from our engineering team at Microsoft. We've got Florian, Kevin, and Brent who are also joining us. So feel free to ask us really just about any question you want. I'll orient the conversation a little bit up front to specifically the work we're doing with Lockheed and Scope AR and the Orion spacecraft. But we can kind of fan out from there depending on kind of where the questions lead us. And so maybe to get started with, I see a question here that talks a little bit about, it's fascinating where you've been or where you are now today with mixed reality and the Orion spacecraft program, and those numbers are impressive. Can you tell a little bit about how you got started in this? Shelly, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of the background story on how Lockheed first got into mixed reality and what you did first and how it's kind of evolved from there?
Sure. Back in about 2011, we were looking at different augmented and mixed reality solutions. And then I met the Scope AR team in 2015. And, we had found a number of solutions up to that point. In many cases, it would take quite a bit of time to build the content. But what we noticed with the WorkLink platform is that we could build the AR and MR scenarios very quickly and efficiently. And we don't have to write code to do it. In the past, we would have to use a PhD in software to be able to develop augmented and mixed reality. And this allowed us to ramp up to learn how to build the content very quickly. Then in 2016, that was our first experience with the HoloLens. And it started coming together where we have the ability to build the content, the ability to overlay mixed reality onto the structure through a device that has the power of the HoloLens. And then in 2017, we ran the first activities on the shop floor. Those activities, we were seeing 35 to 50% reductions on, but then it just spanned from there. It gained interest pretty quickly across our programs.
That's great. Hey, Shelly, I know you mentioned the WorkLink product, and I've talked some about Scope AR, but maybe I'll turn it over to Chad for a moment to just elaborate a little bit more on kind of that WorkLink product. Chad, do you want to just give us the 60-second elevator pitch on WorkLink and Scope AR and what that's all about?
Sure. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Shelly, for that intro. So in a nutshell, Scope AR was created to enable the person who actually knows the asset as close as possible to that workshop, that technician, to create the AR work instruction locally and drive that knowledge locally for better speed, less errors, reduction in time to ROI. And when we look at somebody like Lockheed Martin, who's been doing this a really long time, a leader in AR, 2011, probably before that, right? But it's really encouraging when you also add the HoloLens to the capability to add the work instruction and create it locally and then share it across the organization and see that reduction in errors, see the speed increase on the work instruction creation. And that's really what we're about, whether it's a local team or a remote team, making everyone enable that collaboration and speed to results.
Got it. That's great. Hey, one of the things actually that you mentioned in there and the video talked about, right, was obviously, being able to kind of increase kind of productivity, right, and save touch labor by getting jobs done faster, right? We also talked a lot about reducing the number of errors. Chad, something you hit on in there that we hear time and again relative to companies using mixed reality across the enterprise is it also enables them to really leverage the power of the people who have all of the knowledge in their head in their organization and get it out of their head into an experience that anyone can benefit from. Shelley, do you want to talk a little bit maybe about, kind of the role that experts in your organization play in terms of creating the content that can then be used by everybody?
Sure. So, in the earlier stages, we have a central organization that works with tools across the programs. And at that point, we were building the content through those groups. But then we started to train MEs to build their own content. And that's where you see some really interesting things happen. We have a pretty good idea of the use cases that are beneficial out on the shop floor, but the manufacturing engineers and the technicians have fantastic ideas of where the technology can be used. It's really interesting to see what they come up with when they can build the content on their own. We can train them in less than a day. It's really quick to ramp them up and get them up and running.
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite things about how the whole space has evolved, and how tools like Scope AR have evolved. You're talking about training somebody in a day on how to go out and create their own content. And I know in the past, Shelley, you've talked some about how the amount of time it's taken and the resources needed, right? It used to be a PhD, now it's a no-code process, right? To create the content has really shortened and gotten easier over time. Can you quantify that at all? How long does it take you typically? If you wanted to create a scenario where you were going to walk somebody through step by step, this is what you need to do to perform a job or complete a task. How long does that take on average to create the content for that?
So it takes us about 15 to 30 minutes to build a position alignment scenario. We have the models in place and we can pull that data in and have a scenario very quickly. We've been tested with that. There's programs who have reached out. They need mixed reality scenarios very quickly, and we can turn around sometimes within the hour and have those ready. So it's pretty powerful.
Got it. That's great. I see there's a question here about, hey, can HoloLens be used to reduce risk in hazardous scenarios? For example, actions with flammable goods. It's really important, obviously, to keep human errors at a minimum here. How much effort would it take to kind of do that? Maybe I'll hit this one at a high level, and then I'll open it up to either Chad or Shelley to kind of elaborate on anything that they're seeing as well. I think at a high level, one of the canonical scenarios, and I think we see 6 kind of key use cases or scenarios that over and over again are the ones that the majority of enterprises are gravitating toward. But one of those scenarios is all around training and simulation. And I think we see oftentimes mixed reality tools like HoloLens be used for that training and simulation. You can actually do some pretty powerful simulation in a virtual reality device that you wear in your head where you're completely occluded in a digital environment. But there's something really powerful about being out on a shop floor, on a manufacturing floor, and being able to simulate scenarios such as a chemical spill or an explosion, or even just a large piece of equipment coming through the facility that perhaps is a bit too close to employees. The ability to kind of have that real-time feeling where you're able to kind of see that happening in a real world and see how people react based on how they've been trained to react is really powerful, and we see that quite a bit. I don't know, Shelley, if you've done anything in that regard, or Chad, if either of you have seen, if you've seen anything at Scope AR of folks using mixed reality in those cases. But if you do, I'd love to have you elaborate on that.
That's a fantastic training tool. We see 85% reductions in time to ramp up to a concept, also with greater comprehension. So in the early stages, we measured why mixed reality was so beneficial within our environments. What we found was that it's taking out the interpretation time. We map across decision logic, observing and orienting and deciding and then acting. And what we find is that it takes out a significant amount of that observe, orient, decide portion. So it just makes the whole process more efficient. It's very clear, and I think that's also why we see 0 errors. There's no need to interpret the data. It reduces the risk of error.
Yeah, I think you hit on something fascinating there. And Chad, I'll come back to you if there's anything you want to add to that in a moment. But I think you hit on something really fascinating about being able to learn more quickly and retain knowledge for longer and better. We see that across every industry, right? It's not just related to aerospace. It's not just related to discrete manufacturing. We see that consistently. In fact, even a customer of ours, Case Western Reserve, right, a partner of ours, has been using it to teach anatomy classes, and their students tend to score a full grade letter better if they're using a HoloLens, and retain the information 120% better than those not using a HoloLens. So that notion of kind of being able to train and really that notion of learning by doing has really proven to be quite powerful. There's a question here around, what is the potential impact of HoloLens on other industries? And so I'll paint maybe a little bit of a high level picture on that. And then Chad, I'd love, I know you get to work with a bunch of different customers across a variety of different industries and verticals. I'd love for you to elaborate on that a little bit. But in terms of the impact, I think the impact we see tends to fall into a number of areas. One of those is that that knowledge and that retention, right? So training and upskilling your employees, and having them learn faster and retain information longer is definitely one of those things that we see as pretty standard, regardless of the industry that you're in. That improving productivity in terms of being able to complete a job faster, also being able to complete it with fewer errors, is definitely another area where we see impact almost regardless of industry. It could be a surgeon using a HoloLens for to run through a pre-operational procedure. It could be somebody in a retail environment configuring a high-ticket purchase item, right, to look exactly how the customer wants it to look. Almost time and again, it seems to come down to that increased productivity, fewer errors, kind of more effective learning as three of the core value propositions regardless of industry. Chad, I don't know if you have any other examples maybe outside of discrete manufacturing or with other customers beyond Lockheed where you guys have found those types of results. But if you do, would you mind sharing a couple of those? Chad, I don't think we're able to hear you. Maybe what I'll do is I'll turn it over for a moment while we figure out technical issues. Maybe I'll kind of turn the conversation a little bit to Charlie here for a moment. And basically, there's a question here, which is a great one, right, from Rohan. If a person could start a project from really zero level, right, not having done this before, what tools and resources are available to them? Charlie, do you want to kind of hit that one and start with that one, and then we can maybe have Chad, if he's figured out the technical issues he's having, to come back in and elaborate a little bit as well. Being a partner of ours, he may have a unique perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's absolutely possible to start from zero. We have a number of different tools available and options available for you to do that. First and foremost, I would say, we really care about the open nature of the development platform, right? So what we're hoping to do is to be able to bring the tools and support available to, whatever your preferred methodology is. So, you could write a native DirectX application, but we also support, common middleware platforms in Unity and Unreal. You might, we'd obviously love for you to have an experience with the HoloLens directly, but you might want to get started with, something even simpler. You can actually go download the HoloLens emulator, and you can get started with development there. You can test out ideas, you can go give things a try, even with just the emulator that you can download for your PC. We also have a great set of documentation that's available for folks who want to go in deeper, who want to go learn a little bit more about sort of all of the capabilities across the platform. And we even have somebody here from our development platform team who can maybe elaborate a little bit more on that. So Brent, if there's anything more to add, feel free to jump in.
Charlie, actually, that was a really great coverage of what you're mentioning. What the thing I was going to add is that, we have some great documentation on docs.microsoft.com that I can post here in the Q&A. And if you go there, we have getting started from nothing all the way to an expert that just wants to refine what they're working on.
Yeah, and the other thing that I will throw out there just as additional resources, right, is if you go out and visit hololens.com/partners, we have arguably the largest ecosystem of enterprise solutions out there running on HoloLens. We've got more than 150 different ISVs that have built solutions for different use cases across many, many different industries. And, I think one of the reasons why we've seen such rapid adoption and acceleration of mixed reality over the last really kind of 12 to 24 months is that ecosystem has gotten really fairly robust. And so rather than having to start from scratch writing code, in many cases, companies are able to buy a HoloLens, partner up with one of those entities and basically run a SaaS application on top of their HoloLens device. And it enables them to quickly get started, maybe doing a proof of concept with 5 or 10 people, rolling out a pilot with 50 or 100 people. I know that along those lines, I know that Lockheed Martin has partnered up with Scope AR on that journey, right, to do that. Shelley, talk a little bit, maybe if you wouldn't mind, about how impactful it's been to be able to, rather than having to start from scratch, leverage something like Scope's WorkLink product.
Oh, it's significant. I mean, we were piloting in the early stages in 2016 and then able to run on the shop floor not long after that. With the types of savings that we were seeing, I mean, the first scenario was a 50% touch labor savings. And then we were immediately after that seeing 90% touch labor savings. And then to have the work to integrate with the Lockheed Martin infrastructure was also very, very beneficial. So that's allowed us to get started very quickly and efficiently across the different programs.
Got it. I see there's a question out here that is probably the most asked question, and I know our film crew and whatnot, when we came out and we're interviewing you and shooting videos with you, was all curious in the same thing. Given the design constraints, latency, etc., would it be possible to use HoloLens for remote assistance in the spacecraft? And maybe, Shelley, I can turn that over to you, but maybe before I turn it to you, maybe I'll actually punt that one to Charlie first and have him kind of talk about, hey, how do you use mixed reality in kind of low latency environments, or high latency environments, I mean.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. We've spent a lot of time and energy, making sure that the combination of the device at the edge and sort of our cloud services operate really well together, right? We don't look at it as an either or. A lot of the times it's a better together scenario. So for the HoloLens itself, we built in a ton of capability in the device itself to process things that need to be real time in real time, right? We built the holographic processing unit, a custom piece of silicon that processes all of our sensor streams, everything from your head position to your hand position and gestures, to even microphone and speech input. And all of that stuff we can do at the edge in near to zero latency, especially the pieces around hologram stabilization. Now, when it comes to actually connecting back to your backend communication services like Remote Assist, again, we tolerate a ton of latency in that pipeline. The experience is not dissimilar to what you would have in a Teams call here, for example, with somebody in a relatively high latency environment. But the key here is that no matter what happens in that network link, the holographic experience is really going to be sort of founded in the low latency experiences that we have at the edge that's delivered by the silicon and the sensors that are on the HoloLens itself.
I think this whole topic really kind of starts to go down this path of really talking about the power of using compute at the edge in something like a HoloLens, coupled with really leveraging the power of the cloud. We talk a lot here about our mixed reality services, right, that leverage the power of Azure to either help you render really high fidelity, high polygon count 3D types of images on a device like a HoloLens, or kind of that help with anchoring holographic content to specific physical objects or to specific locations in time and space. Shelley, talk a little bit about kind of in the world of Lockheed Martin, right? What's the significance of being able to tap into not just the HoloLens device, but also, kind of the power and capability that something like Azure brings to the table?
There's many elements of the workflow and the pipeline that are significant for us. Being able to streamline that. So if I can use models without having to decimate the models, render high quality with the metadata that goes along with it, that's significant. If we can align to the structures without having to manually manipulate that alignment, that's significant. There's a number of areas where the Azure products benefit that entire workflow and optimize the experience.
Awesome. Yeah, I think again, it's been fascinating. Like I said, this large ecosystem of ISV solutions coming out has really helped accelerate the space. I think some of these investments that are being made to really leverage the power of that intelligent cloud and the intelligent edge together have really helped tremendously as well. I think, Shelley, one of the things that I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about is, we talk a lot about the value and the impact of the product on kind of those hard business metrics and KPIs, things like, reducing touch labor, reducing error, or in your case, it sounds like almost eliminating errors. But what is the impact of it on the employees and the people who use it, right? I mean, talk a little bit about kind of, are they resistant to change? How do they react when you first put a HoloLens on them?
Oh, they haven't been resistant to change. They're really pretty excited about it, and it's really pretty fun to watch. They'll put it on a device. We don't do training in advance on the HoloLens in most cases. They put it on the device, and 15 minutes later they're working. We might show them a few things about voice command or gesture, but it's pretty intuitive. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard the comment, I feel like Iron Man. They can hold their palm out with a laser appearing from the palm of their hand and select content, and at that point they're pretty much sold. I think in general it helps them to stay focused on the hands-on work. It takes out the need to spend time looking at drawings and rectangular data, and that's really what they like, is the hands-on work. So we've had situations where I can't get people to go on a lunch break. They want to keep working, or at the end of the day, they don't want to go home. We've seen situations where it should have taken 3 weeks with augmented or mixed reality to do the work, and they finish in 2 weeks. We find that they just work to later days because they just really enjoy getting so much work done. We said it over and over. We've had technicians who are close to retirement who extend or talk about pushing the retirement out so that they can see the technology deployed in their environment and have that experience. Many times we've had people say they don't want to go back to the traditional method. They only want to work with mixed reality going forward. So it's a pretty positive response.
Yeah, we certainly love to hear that. I think we always talk internally too about how that experience, the very first time someone puts a HoloLens on, after 15 or 30 seconds, you see a big smile on their face, and that's honestly the most fun part of the job. Well, look, I think we're at about time here. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. Appreciate kind of all the folks who the experts who joined us to answer those questions. There's a bunch of resources for you here. Really, everything hangs off of hololens.com. So if you are in doubt, I would encourage you to visit Microsoft www.hololens.com, and you can find just about anything you need. So thank you very much, and I hope that you'll enjoy the rest of Ignite.
Thank you.